Hey, what's going on, APUSH world? We have Chapter 8 of America's History for you today. I'm using the 8th edition. This one is titled Creating a Republican Culture, 1790 to 1820. There's lots of stuff mentioned in this chapter that is specifically mentioned in the new curriculum, so make sure you check out the description below for videos that match up with the new curriculum. All right, let's start off talking about the capitalist commonwealth. Specifically, we're going to focus on banks, manufacturing, and markets. So during this time, we see a huge increase in banking and credit. And the second bank of the United States was chartered in 1816 for 20 years. It's very important to know for 20 years because in 1836, the bank will expire and we will see debates going forward about the constitutionality of the second bus. In 1819, there was the first in a series of many panics that will hit this country. And a panic is a severe economic downturn. And one of the reasons for this cause was that state banks overissued notes that they did not have specie or gold and silver to back up. Also, there was over speculation on Western land by farmers and individuals. Many people were buying land in the hopes of selling it at a higher price in the future. As a result of this, there becomes this growing distrust of banks and especially the second bank of the United States. Merchants were especially hard hit from the Panic of 1819, and more of manufacturing moved from homes to factories. Keep in mind, for a very long time, everything was made in homes. People didn't go to factories or other large areas where everyone would work together and build things. That happened in the home. New England and the West focused on raising livestock, especially cities like Cincinnati that emerged on the Ohio River. That city became known as Porkopolis because they raised so many pigs and then would ship pork all over the country. Forests were removed in many areas of the north because of the livestock, so the environment has drastically changed. And textile mills were built around water early on because water was a source of power for these mills. For the transportation system, we see the development of turnpikes, or essentially toll rolls, that increased. And the first one is the Lancaster Turnpike in Pennsylvania. And this helped connect the interior of the country to the East Coast in particular, and this would increase trade. Later on, we'll see the development of railroads. We also see the development of a Commonwealth system, and under John Marshall, the Supreme Court, and here is the fourth Chief Justice, they ruled in favor of expanding business, and he and states would use this idea of eminent domain, that they can take private land, the government can take private land from individuals as long as they pay for it to build something. And state legislatures followed suit with it. And the Commonwealth system that develops is providing government aid to private businesses. And this is something that the government does even today, and it really has done for the past 200 years or so. So let's focus on opportunity and equality, but really during this time it's only for white men and white adult men in particular. Now, the U.S. was unique in the world at this time. There was no aristocratic families like there were in many other parts of the world, particularly Europe. However, there were numerous laws that restricted rights based on race and gender. So women and slaves and African Americans, whether they were free or slaves, still had very few, if any, rights. Mercy Otis Warren was a woman that argued against this idea of patriarchy, or that males should dominate families. And we see the emergence of Republican marriages. More and more marriages were based on love, and there were fewer arranged marriages. So this idea of republicanism, of liberty, of free choice, of using reason, that even carries over into marriages. However, husbands still had more power than wives, particularly when it came to property. They were the ones that were in control of property. Now, Republican motherhood is an idea that emerges. Absolutely, positively no. So you'll see it started. This is in the new curriculum. And it's this idea that mothers would raise their children to be good citizens of the United States. As a result of this, mothers took a more active role in education. So we do see education opportunities for women increasing, but really it's for the purpose of turning around and educating their children. So there are two modes of parenting that are emerging during this time period. One is kind of encouraging independence and letting children make their own choices, and the other one is authoritarianism, or the idea that the parents should strictly raise their children. Debates over education emerge, and Thomas Jefferson was somebody who advocated education for Americans, and he did so because he realized it's these children that will one day grow up and vote, and he wanted to make sure that the voters would be educated individuals. More schools were located in the North than in the South, and I'm going to ask you why. Hit the pause button, take a second, and figure out why are there more schools located in the North than the South. If you said because people in the North were closer together and it was easier to build schools, you're absolutely correct. Think about the South. The makeup of it is a rural community. There is lots of land and space in between families and towns. So therefore, education was not as accessible to those living down there. In the 1820s, we see an increase in the funding for education in states. And Noah Webster, this guy here, helped standardize the English language. And you've probably heard of the Webster Dictionary. His book has sold over 60 million copies and really helped educate people on how to properly spell words. There were different spellings of the same word prior to the standardization of the English language, really around the time of the Civil War, and Noah Webster really helped contribute to that. So let's focus on the American Revolution and slavery. Thousands of slaves gained freedom via the British during the Revolutionary War, and some did gain freedom from America as well. The word manumission means freeing of slaves by owners, and in Virginia in 1782 they passed a piece of legislation that allowed for this. The Quakers, they're really some of the first people to be abolitionists, and the combination of Quakers and Enlightenment thought during that time really challenged the ideas of slavery, helped challenge slavery. And this idea of, are all men born with natural rights when there are millions of people in bondage? And free blacks, those that were able to gain freedom, whether it was in the North or the South, they still faced a significant amount of discrimination. So just because an African American was not a slave did not mean they had a lot of rights. In fact, they had very few rights. Slavery is defended by those in the South. And in 1792, the Virginia legislature passed new manumission laws that forbid the manumission of slaves. And slavery was viewed as a necessary evil. Many people in the South said during this time, late 1700s, early 1800s, you know, it's not necessarily a good thing, but it is something that is necessary for the betterment of America. This idea that the economy was very dependent on slave labor. Gabriel Prosser was an individual who planned a rebellion in the South, and he and 30 others were hanged. Now, with all slave rebellions, we're going to learn about a lot of slave rebellions in the next couple chapters. Definitely know that slave laws were more harsh after a rebellion. Virtually no rebellion is successful, and afterwards, slave laws will become more harsh for those slaves. Okay, so the North and the South begin to grow apart, and the emergence of sectionalism develops. And education was much better in the North. There are much, much higher literacy rates than in the South. We just talked about some reasons for that. When we're talking about slavery and national politics, we see this transition from that necessary evil I just talked about to a positive good. And here is John C. Calhoun. He was a vice president, senator of South Carolina. He defended slavery as a positive good, actually arguing that it was good for slaves as well. And the Southern dominance in the federal government, both in the Senate and in the presidency, helped ensure that slavery would be protected. We do see African Americans begin to speak out, and with the cotton boom, again, that cotton gin invented by Eli Whitney, that really increased the demand for slavery. Some societies developed, including the American Colonization Society, which proposed that free slaves would be sent to Africa, and specifically Liberia, this country that was established for it. But many of these former slaves and slaves rejected this idea, the idea that, you know, for many of them, all they had ever known was America. They didn't want to go to some place in Africa that they had never been before. They wanted to remain in America as free Americans. And we do see new black churches develop as well during this time. So the Missouri crisis, definitely, absolutely, positively know the Missouri Compromise. This is mentioned in the new curriculum. Check out my video in the description below. So here's the deal. We have the Louisiana Territory over here in green, and this blue, and Louisiana down there, and the yellow in Missouri. So Missouri, this state here, wants to apply for statehood as a slave state. This would make 12 slave states and 11 free states, so it would upset the balance. We also have the introduction of the Talmadge Amendment. This was from a New York congressman, Talmadge, and he proposed for gradual emancipation of slaves in Missouri. Basically, that children of slaves, when they hit 25, they would be freed. This freaks the South out. They hate it because they say, you know what, if you can gradually emancipate slaves, then slavery could be ended altogether everywhere. So the South was absolutely adamant against the Talmadge Amendment. So what is the solution? Well, we also have Maine before we get to the solution up here. They wanted to apply, break away from Massachusetts, and they wanted to apply as a free state. The South is like, absolutely not. You cannot have that. So the solution, this was devised by Henry Clay, Missouri is added as a slave state. Maine from Massachusetts is added as a free state, and the balance here stays equal at 12 states free, 12 states slave. And that's very important because neither side will get an edge in the Senate as a part of Congress. And slavery would be prohibited above the 3630 line, and that's this line right here. And you'll notice that Missouri is above the 3630 line, but all future states from the Louisiana Purchase, everything above it will be free. So all this area here will be free, and these will be slave down here. Keep that in mind because this does change in the future. We will see. Definitely know all three parts of the Missouri Compromise. Okay, let's jump over to religious freedom. Thomas Jefferson, he proposed a bill for establishing religious freedom in Virginia, and this helped inspire the First Amendment. Now, here is a picture of his grave, and you'll notice that it says on here, "Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. Born April 2nd, 1743, died July 4th, 1826. What is missing from there? It does not say that he was president. He didn't consider that one of his greatest achievements. He considered this one of his greatest achievements. Now, there's such an increase in the number of denominations during this time, religious denominations, that helped guarantee there would not be an established church in any one state because there were so many competing factions. Virginia outlaws religious requirements for political office, and many churches rely on voluntarism or the funding of churches from members as opposed to the government funding. Evangelical Methodists and Baptists are new denominations that gain a large number of members. A significant number of people become Evangelical Methodists and Baptists. Then we have the Second Great Awakening. You'll see stars. Again, it's something that's mentioned in the new curriculum. This is the spread of Christianity throughout the United States in the early 19th century. And you have emotional meetings, very similar to the First Great Awakening when the New Lights would give these emotional sermons. And you see these emotional meetings in Cambridge, Kentucky, and also Western New York, where I live, and it becomes known as the burned over district because so many people convert to Christianity. Inspired by George Whitefield of the First Great Awakening, preachers increase conversions. Again, they appeal to people's emotions here. And there's even new denominations of Christianity specifically for blacks, and many saw slavery as similar to the plight of the Israelites under Jesus. So many black slaves began to develop their own form of Christianity as well. And not just black slaves, but African Americans too. So religion and reform. So we're continuing with the Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening. Definitely know this reform part because this is a huge part of it. Unitarians are this new religious group. They believe in rational thought, and they reject the idea of the Holy Trinity and the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Many churches during this time rejected Calvin's predestination, the idea that when you are born, you are either going to go to heaven or hell. And the big idea of the Second Great Awakening is that they encourage people to better the world. And an example of this is the Humane Society. So you see different societies and organizations develop trying to improve the world. And the two biggest areas you see this in are abolitionism and women's rights. And we'll see that in future chapters. The Shakers were a new religious group that emerged during this time, founded by Mother Ann Lee. And they were called Shakers because during their religious ceremonies, they would do this dance, and people would say it was like the earth was literally shaking. They promoted celibacy and women's rights. So this is a group that you could not be born into. You could not be born a Shaker. You had to choose to become a Shaker. And women did have significant rights under Shakers. Women gained some rights in other churches. For instance, the gender segregated prayer meetings ended. And Mother's Magazine was a magazine that taught Christian women how to raise children. Again, this idea of Republican motherhood. Emma Willard was an outspoken advocate of education for women, and she helped form the first college for women for higher education. All right, let's do a quick recap of this chapter. Republican motherhood, know it. Absolutely, positively no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to know the importance of this. Women were expected to raise children to be contributing members of society. Definitely know the transition of slavery from being seen as a necessary evil to a positive good. The Talmadge and the Missouri Compromise, absolutely know all of that. That is fair game for the new curriculum. And the Second Great Awakening, the idea that it increased denominations, that it gave more rights for women, and inspired people to improve other areas of life, which we'll talk about in the coming chapters as well. All right, guys, that is everything you need to know about Chapter 8. I thank you guys very much for watching. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And I wish you nothing but the best of luck on all your tests, including the one in May. Thank you again for watching, and have a good day.